Good afternoon and welcome. You're listening live to Heart-to-Heart, a program which aims to help you understand and to become your loving self. I'm Dr. Mitra Rashidian. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and a certified sexologist in full-time private practice located in Encino, California. And I'm here with my wonderful friend, colleague, business partner, most trusted person in my life,
Oh,
Dr. Robert Jaffe.
thank you. I'm Dr. Robert Jaffe, also a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm also a certified hypnotherapist, and I'm here with Dr. Rashidian to share with you some of what we've learned over many years of study and practice, the goal of which is to feel more loving and joyful every day of our lives. We always dedicate this program to you, our listeners, and we are here to let you know that you do contain within you everything you need to feel happy, joyous, and free. We are born into our world as our loving, authentic, true selves, and we come in open, curious, honest. We are all sexual, and we come in trusting. We also have the capacity to have some other wonderful qualities, some of which are we can be calm, we can be emotionally available and connected with others. We can also be confident, and we also can be compassionate, which is one of the most powerful ways of feeling loved and loving in the world. And that's it.
And that's it. Okay. Our phone number live is 951-922-3532. Please call us, join us, share your thoughts with us, tell us what you think about what you hear at this program, and then how else we can enhance it so you can benefit from it. And we will know that only if you contact us and share your questions with us. And as you know, our Thursday program is about human sexuality and sexual healthcare. And as part of human sexuality, one of the historical aspects of it is nothing but sexual fantasies.
Sexual fantasies, yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So what are sexual fantasies? Basically, according to literature, they are either mental images or patterns of how a person thinks about, sexuality,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that can either create or enhance somebody's sexuality, sexual quality, sexual arousal. So a sexual fantasy is basically created by an individual imagination, right? Memory, and it can also be impacted by external, factors,
Mm-hmm.
right? Such as porn,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then, or sexual attraction of another person. And basically, when we look at the sexual fantasy, uh, there is a history about it. Some of the example of sexual fantasies are included in if anyone have gone to any museum of fine arts, right?
Mm-hmm.
In particular, European museums such as Louvre or other notable museum, we will see paintings around 5th century or even beyond that, or 14th century, 15th, 16th centuries, right? We see there are lots of painting that they are beautifully done when there are a group of male and female are among each other naked or half naked, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or we see other forms of painting that they are so erotic, and they are so beautifully done in such a incredible backgrounds, that's included in the painting. So those are some of the historical signs that human mind, in terms of sexuality and their imagination is not something new. It didn't just happen by pornography that we have it today.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
So it has been there. So if some of it was created just by being in nature, right? Some of it was done based on the law of attraction, right? Some of it was done because the person couldn't make it to their lover, right? They couldn't connect. So a variety of factors actually has helped human beings to come up with imagination in order to take care of their sexuality, enhance the quality of sexuality. So we see that when it comes to sexuality, imagination is actually a major aspect of it, right?
Yes.
What's your thought?
Imagination is something I think that most people don't realize how powerful.
Right.
Because everything, both in nature and man-made, started off in the imagination. Somebody had to imagine the earth before the earth was formed.
Right.
And somebody had to imagine the Empire State Building before the Empire State Building was built.
Right.
So we say, or I say, and I'm not alone, that God is imagination.
Right.
And God's imagination is clearly exhibited throughout the world and throughout nature. All the billions of life forms on this planet alone indicate that imagination is universally powerful. And so we, as human beings, we have that aspect, we have that God aspect of imagination, and whatever we imagine, we can create and have proven that we can create it. Somebody had to imagine us going into outer space, and somebody had to imagine us going to the moon, and people have been imagining going to other planets, and there's no doubt that we are on the road to that. And so when it comes to our imagination with our sexuality, that too is unlimited. And a lot of people don't understand that imagination, when it remains in imagination, it's okay to imagine anything. When you bring it into reality, then you have to, of course, consider that is this affecting other people, and is it going to be harmful to other people? And then it becomes something that isn't okay if it's harmful to other people. But as long as it remains in the imagination, and people have all sorts of deep, dark, imaginative scripts inside of them, oftentimes they feel ashamed, and they feel guilty, and they feel bad. But we have an imagination so that we can run the gamut of all experiences. Right. And so long as it's something that remains within us, there's nothing wrong with it.
Right. Well, sometimes, the imaginations, they don't just stay inside of us because human desire to act on their imaginations,
Yeah, people have that choice.
People have that choice.
Mm-hmm.
So one way of knowing about sexual imaginations, as we see, it is through painting that we have in the museum, and others that the newer ones that they are done by different artists. We see it in the poem, all those poets who write all those beautiful words, and they describe their lover, in such a romantic way, and in such an exceptional, time and, situations and nature and all of that. Or all those musicians who write those beautiful songs for us, or the music. So we see that sexual fantasies, can show itself in variety of forms. So it's not just somebody seen a porn movie and become, imaginary about how they want to have their sex life. Well, that also can happen for people who are not, poetic, or they're not painters, or they're not songwriters, or any other form of art that can be used to show our imagination.
Right.
And so people, sometimes they need help to kind of enhance make sense of their imagination, and then to kind of bring it into reality for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But the question becomes, what makes a nation to be able to show their sexual imaginations, and then there are nations that you never hear about their sexuality or sexual fantasies. Right. So we see that in nations where social factors kind of don't limit sexuality or have less restriction, or they don't consider it as taboo as other nations, or when there are cultural factors are more open and receptive of people's sexuality,
Mm-hmm.
or religious factors where they are not so restricted in terms of sexual practices, we see that those nations, like European, for example, are more able to be expressive, whether it's through painting or just free act, or anywhere that they are able, according to their social norms, to show their sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And nations that they are far more restricted, we don't hear about them. So this doesn't mean that they don't have sexual imaginations. As a matter of fact, the more restriction, the more powerful those imaginations can be.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And we see that those imaginations are playing out in hiding, and therefore people don't talk about it, but in therapy room we hear about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the reasons that I brought up the subject, because a client of mine talked to me for the first time in her life, right, about when and how she learned about masturbation.
Mm-hmm.
And then ever since, she hasn't been stopped masturbating, and she always felt ashamed. She always felt guilty. She always felt, about the imaginations that she had while she was masturbating. She really felt bad about herself.
Mm-hmm.
Because in her mind, she was acting, she was having a sinful act. And she was listening to our prior podcast, and she was listening to my words, and what the social system, health departments are saying these days about how to have sex, in a distance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And masturbation, as you and I know, it's a preferred choice these days,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that gave her permission to talk, as a matter of fact,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is how she said, when she masturbates, first of all, nobody knows. So that was the first time that she talked about it to me, which made me feel great. I was happy to see the level of trust that she had with me.
Mm-hmm.
And then she started to talk about her fantasies,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And how her fantasies have guided her to enhance the quality of her masturbation.
Right.
So we are getting to our commercial break, and more of this in a few minutes, 3 minutes.
In a few minutes,
Right.
we will see you soon.
We will see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back to Heart-to-Heart. Dr. Mitra and Dr. Robert here. Our phone number here live is 951-922-3532. And we are talking about sexual fantasies as our topic for today, human sexuality,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we were talking about, how my client actually gave me the idea for today's topic, as she, for the first time in her life, she started to talk about her history of masturbation.
Mm-hmm.
And how fantasies were attached to that. And she told me that when she masturbates, she, by herself, she has more sexual satisfaction than when she has sex with her husband.
Uh-huh.
Right? And then that was another set of guilt that she was feeling, that why she has better sex with herself rather than having it with her husband. And that opened the door that she actually fakes orgasm with her husband.
Uh-huh.
Right? And then so she felt like she was actually doing a sinful act all the years of her marriage.
Mm.
And she was fearful. What if she gets caught by one of her kids? And and then so she was very frustrated. In one hand, she was happy to hear from all these news media that masturbation is okay, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
In the other hand, she didn't know what to do with her, what she called her very wild sexual fantasies.
Mm-hmm.
So in asking her and then others that I know of, sexual fantasies, they have no limits.
Right. Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, they have no limits, and the only limits really that are negative limits are the limits that we put on ourselves,
right,
as far as fantasy.
Right.
And of course, there's always people who are afraid that if you fantasize about something, that you're going to, number one, want to act it out in the world.
Right.
And number two, that you will act it out in a way that's harmful to other people. So then they try to control what is okay to fantasize about. And one thing we know in psychology is that whatever you resist persists. Because the feeling and the thought and the fantasy wants to be felt, come up, and get expressed in some way. And then it leaves. It's sort of like, okay, when you get hungry and you eat, then you're not hungry anymore, right? But if you try to tell yourself when you're hungry, I shouldn't be hungry and I'm not hungry, the hunger persists. And it's the same thing with sexual fantasies. So the more okay you are with allowing whatever fantasies there are to be there, the less power they have over you. It's not the opposite. It's not the opposite, where if you have the fantasy, you're going to act on it.
Well, here's where gender role philosophy comes to play,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because female usually think that they can't or they shouldn't, or it's sinful or it's shameful to allow their fantasies to stretch as far as they can stretch.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and they limit themselves. However, for men, that's less possibility, right? Men, they allow their fantasies to go as far as it goes for the most part. And then for some people, those sexual fantasies actually, when they feel free to experience that, it not only enhances the quality of their sexuality, but it's actually a way of getting to know themselves sexually.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
However, we know that this is different for men and men and women, because women kind of limit themselves when they want to experience their sexual fantasy the way that it comes to their imagination.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we see that that's a problem right there. And even women, when they have sex, some report that while they're having sex with their partner and sexual fantasy kind of emerges there, they don't feel comfortable to allow the imagination to come to the play, because they are with somebody and they feel guilty that, oh, where am I? Am I in my imagination or am I with my partner? Right?
As though both aren't possible at the same moment.
At the same moment.
Right.
But in fact, we know this for the fact that allowing imagination to come into play and talk about them with the partner kind of engages not only on engages sexual satisfaction, not only from a physical aspect of it,
Mm-hmm.
but from emotional. It's like both of them are in the fantasy, both of them are together at the same time, and it kind of increases the intensity, increases the pleasure, and increases the level of satisfaction.
Right.
However, that depends on where each individual is in terms of accepting the fantasy. And also, like you said, we want to know what type of fantasy that is.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. So the time really to talk about your sexual fantasies with your partner is not when you're having sex
Right.
at the beginning.
Right.
Now, of course, once you talk about your sexual fantasy and your partner can understand and can even enjoy that fantasy along with you, then, of course, it becomes easy, safe, and pleasurable to share that fantasy while you're having sex with your partner. But to bring it up for the first time when you're having sex with your partner, of course, you're in a very physically and emotionally vulnerable place when you're being sexual with someone. And so if that person, finds that a turn off or feels disgusted by it or very negative, it could be very, very harmful to you, and not just ruin the sex for that moment, but can actually affect the course of the relationship. So then we talk about the issue of feeling emotionally safe with your partner to share your fantasies. And that's part of this. That's part of this topic. But right now, we're just focused on allowing yourself to have fantasies. So maybe it would be good to talk about some common fantasies that people have to sort of normalize it. And while we're on this topic, we again want to invite you to call.
Absolutely. Yes.
And certainly, if you want to share a sexual fantasy, it's going to be anonymous. We won't know who you are. Or if you want to just ask a question about it, we would love for you to do that.
Yes, our phone number is 951-922-3532. And, your sexual fantasies are important. And the more you know about them, the more you feel safe with them, and the more you can understand yourself as a sexual being, and the more you can learn whether you can apply them in the real activity or not.
Absolutely.
And where they're coming from theoretical perspective. When we look at John Bowlby, the father of attachment theory, he made a point that sexual fantasies, the nature of sexual fantasies, the type of sexual fantasies, are directly connected to whether a person has had a healthy or unhealthy attachment with their caregiver. So if the early attachment to the caregiver, mainly mom, was not a healthy one, sexual fantasies can turn into love and hate kind of fantasies together.
Yeah.
So in one hand, the person, if it's a male, let's say a male, for example, has a fantasy of raping women, right?
Yeah.
And then at the same time take care of them, right? So we see, therefore, this type of people usually they carry with them the shame, the guilt, the fear of having those fantasies, and it's not necessarily about that they want to rape their mom, and some may actually do, but then again the fact that they see themselves as somebody that can rape or hurt women during sex, that shame and guilt and fear always is there, and doesn't allow them to open up and talk about their sexual fantasy to see why they're having that type of imagination and fantasies, right?
Yeah, and I want to add that that you don't even have to be curious about why you're having a fantasy in order to enjoy the fantasy,
right?
Because having the fantasy, there's a big difference. Again, I want to restate: there's a big difference between having a fantasy and acting it out in real life. And of course, anything that you act out in real life is going to affect another person. And so, if you're doing something that's hurtful to the person or against the other person's will, then the fantasy that has become reality is a very powerful, out of control feeling for the person who's acting it out. And the vast majority of people, men and women, are not subject to that out of control feeling. However, our fears are such that we fear that, and other people fear that, and so we then don't allow ourselves simply to have the fantasy, recognizing that it's totally safe in our imagination for us to do anything. And you were talking about rape fantasies, and men have those and women have those as well.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
I'm actually looking at the photo here,
Yeah.
There's a famous painting by artist, by Hokusai, if I'm
Hokusai.
Hokusai,
Hokusai.
right? And the name of the painting is The Dream of the Fisherman's Wife,
Right.
right? So this, I wish I could show this to you, but this woman is laying down on her back,
Mhm.
right? When this huge octopus is giving her oral sex.
Ah, okay.
Right?
Okay.
So I mean, here
Yeah.
you can see that, right?
I can see it.
You can see that.
Yep.
So, so that's her fantasy,
Yeah.
right? That's
Yeah.
her fantasy, and that's his fantasy,
Mhm.
right? Because he painted that you know, a fisherman's wife, in his imagination, can have oral sex with the giant octopus.
Right. Right. A lot of sexual fantasies, like rape fantasies, are really about control.
Yes.
And so the man's fantasy is that he is in control of the woman, and the woman's fantasy is that she's being controlled, which both allow each other to be totally free. They don't have to worry about control because he has total control and she has, and she's given up total control. So they're free to express all their sexual passion and self.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the more we look at societies with sex being a taboo topic, the more closed that topic is within a society.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, of course, within the family of origin, we see that both between male and female sexual fantasies they can be stronger and they can be more what's the word? More difficult, more hard, something that in actuality cannot happen, right? Because
like for example,
like the fisherman's wife, like this
so
one.
So
Right.
like an octopus
Like an octopus,
wouldn't really be
right.
giving oral sex.
Oral sex.
Yeah.
And that's because, you know, when the fear is there about having, you know, about having sex or talking about sex or sex being a sinful act, you know, people imagine that negativity in their imaginations too,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So every time they want to think about sex, they imagine of this horrible situation, whether they are beaten up to have sex or they are raped to have sex, or this imaginary animal or this imaginary creature is trying to hurt their body in a sexual way.
Right.
So, and this is something that we hear from our clients coming from a different culture, close culture. However, we hear from those that they are more in a less restricted cultures about sexuality, their imaginations and their fantasies are like heavenly sometimes. Some of the things that they talk about are so beautiful, so romantic, so poetic. And some of them are in actuality can happen, and they make it happen. And I have heard that from clients that they were thinking about how they want to have sex with somebody that they love, and they know what she liked, they know what he liked, and they just made that happen. Right. So we see that cultural taboo can even impact our imaginations.
Well, yeah,
Right.
yeah. Whatever culture we're living in, we've been exposed to their prejudices about what's okay and what's not okay.
Right.
So, I think it's important also for us to mention more specifically what some people's fantasies are, so that our listeners can understand what people actually fantasize about. And perhaps we can do that after our next break.
Yeah, we have, I think, if a couple of minutes here to talk about, and then what I like to say more about gender role and societies and sexual fantasies. You know, this is a very important aspect. We think that gender role is something that only controls our behavior in society, right? But in fact, it controls even our imagination, and men have a more openness about what they want out of their sexuality, and therefore their imagination is more acceptable, more
well, it's part of the double standard.
Part of the double
which
standard,
which is men are encouraged to be sexual and encouraged to be proud of their sexual prowess.
Right.
And women are taught to be modest and demure, and to have their sexuality a hidden part of them that actually inhibits them from expressing who they really are in the sexual arena, as well as having the fantasies. They also oftentimes are very inhibited when they're having sex,
Right.
initiating and expressing and making noise, and all of that leads to a lot of negative feelings about ourselves and about each other.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So let's come back after our commercial break so
Let's
we
come
can
back.
continue with this amazing topic.
And please call us.
Please call us 951-922-3532. Sexual fantasies and an aspect of human sexuality, and how it originates and how it is played out, and what can you do with it, what factors impact that. So we have talked about some of that, and this is such a vast area of human sexuality that I think just one time talking about it is injustice. So we may bring this topic back again. However, we want to know about your sexual fantasies. We want to know, how do you imagine your sexual activity to be like, right? What gives you pleasure? Have you ever been able to talk about your sexual fantasies with anyone at all? Or what do you feel when you think about sexual fantasy? Do you feel ashamed, or do you feel great about yourself? So we hope that you feel great with, about yourself, of course, with respect to the type of sexual fantasies you have, right? So.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I want to say that you can have what I would call dark, hurtful sexual fantasies, and still feel great about yourself.
Yes.
You don't you don't have to have a loving, romantic sexual fantasy in order to feel good about yourself.
Right.
But I think if you do have the dark sexual fantasy, you will tend to feel not so good about yourself unless you really understand the origin of that for yourself and what that symbolically means to you.
Right, exactly.
So, but I was just reading some of your literature here, and earlier I was talking about, we were talking about rape fantasies and being forced sex fantasies, and the information I was reading here was that it's a very, very, very common theme for both men and women.
Yes.
To have forced sex or rape sex fantasies, which in no way means to either the man or the woman that they wish to engage in that behavior.
Right.
The woman certainly doesn't wish to be raped in real life, nor does the man wish to rape the woman in real life. But the fantasy is often one really about rape seduction, where the man is giving pleasure to the woman, and the woman is losing control. And that's part of male psychology with what turns men on with women, is that they feel powerful and they feel joyful as they see the woman losing control and expressing her loss of control. That heightens the man's sexual enjoyment.
Exactly.
And so the rape fantasies are simply an extension of that.
And you're so right. I mean, when we look at the paintings in particular, right,
Mm-hmm.
famous paintings, we see that in terms of power, there is one man and then several women around him,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
But we see a woman being captured and tied up and ready to get raped, or actually is being raped. We see that herself in a suffering situation, in
Mm-hmm.
a painful situation,
Mm-hmm.
in a helpless and hopeless situation, and then
Right.
the man shows the act of power, or actually more than one man is there to present to show the act of power.
Right.
So in our fantasy, we can play a powerful role,
Mm-hmm.
or we can play a victim role, or we can play any role that comes to our imagination. There is no limit as to where our imaginations can take us.
Right.
Right. However, some of both male or female, they have repeated imagination. It's just the same scenario repeating itself.
Correct.
Right. So according to different theories, so that can be traced back to see how that imagination has been created and from what point. And usually, according to both Bowlby and Freud, childhood has a lot to do with that.
Yes, childhood and of course early sexual experiences.
Early sexual experience, and at what age. For those who have been, molested at age, let's say 5 or earlier, or later, or during teen years or in adulthood, imaginations have a different form, right?
Right.
So we see that, our lifestyle, our social factors, our culture, religious, and how people are around us about their sexuality can shape and reshape our sexual imagination and fantasies.
Right.
The main thing that we hear about sexual fantasies, that primarily, no matter how it happens, right, it adds to the intensity of sexual activities.
Right.
So the way we human being frame that fantasy, however it is, ultimately it's a enhancing process. Ultimately, it gives the person more intense sexual satisfaction in that, whether the imagination and the fantasy is hurtful one to the person, or it is hurtful to another person, or however they shape it, right?
Right.
Ultimately, it's a satisfactory situation to sexuality, and people use their imagination to have better sex altogether.
Right. Yeah. So another common male sexual fantasy is what you were just talking about, is having sex with more than one woman.
More than one woman.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So and a lot of times that's a big turn on to men, and sometimes women are okay with that.
Right.
And what is the draw about that? Why is that? Also, men are also fantasize a lot about women being sexual with other women. So those are common sexual fantasies as well. The man having 2 or 3 women, and the woman having a sex with another woman while the man is either watching and or participating.
Exactly. In men, what we see, as part of, why they go to fantasies such as having sex with more than one woman, there have been traces of men having erectile issues or having premature ejaculation issues. But in their fantasies, they are powerful. In their fantasies, they don't feel any sort of limitation for themselves, right? And they use that actually to kind of stimulate their desire to kind of stay more on top of their urges and not to release quickly. Right. And at some point, I have to say, it has helped some men to stay more powerful or stay more in control of their sexual activities that way. However, that just fantasy and imagination is not an ultimate solution to take care of premature ejaculation or arousal dysfunctions. Right.
Yeah.
So those are also need their clinical evaluation, and they need their psychotherapy, they need their training. However, we're not limiting just to that. And if somebody benefits from sexual imaginations or fantasies to enhance the quality of their sexuality when it's related to any issue about sexuality, I think that's a good thing to have.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I also want to say another male sexual fantasy, and of course this act doesn't always stay in fantasy, and it happens frequently, is when men are receiving oral sex from women.
Right.
Men seem to, in general, enjoy that act and enjoy that fantasy, and I think in part that is about the woman just taking care of the man. The woman, he doesn't have to reciprocate. He doesn't have to worry about the woman's pleasure in that act. And so the man can feel okay about being totally self-centered and totally selfish, and the woman is there just to take care of him. And I think that is a very common theme for a lot of men, and a lot of men feel disappointed when the person that they're with doesn't enjoy that and doesn't like that.
Right, and then however, in their imagination, that's a normal act, and that is something that needs to be done, and they make it happen for themselves in their imagination. I mean, here I'm looking at a few images that I have downloaded. So we see several statue here, and how they are actually performing, and we see more than one person in this sexual act. And also another sexual fantasy that we have to receive report of happening is when people hurt each other, or having sex with animals, or having sex with these aliens, or having sex with things that normally don't happen in real life, right? Using objects that in a normal life, normal sexual activity, people don't use. And there are images of sexual fantasy of self-harm.
Right.
So while a person is doing masturbation, they're self-harming themselves, right?
Right.
Like this photo right here, this image is showing somebody actually, put a knife in his penis, or above his penis, and that's a painting by Saint Sebastian,
Right.
And this is really an interesting painting. I wish you could see it, but you can download all these sexual fantasy paintings off the internet, so you can see how people use their imagination to number one, stimulate their sexual desires, and also to get to that intensity that is satisfying for them.
Where did you get these?
I got it off the internet.
Do you know where?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Can you tell the audience?
Oh, sure. You can go to Wikipedia and download, sexual desire.
Wikipedia, sexual desires.
Sexual desires.
Cool.
Yes.
Okay.
Right, and then they have the photos, they have all the images, they have all this information, and even different form of, how sexual fantasies can play out in different cultures. Like, we know that we talked about during break, in Japan, for example, how this is done. We see that how people chain themselves, and then they start, using, leather straps to
whip themselves.
Or have somebody else do that for them, right? And the level of hurt, the level of pain that they experience, actually, it starts in their imagination. So they kind of make that a reality for themselves.
Yeah, oftentimes our fantasies are connected with pain that we have, that we've repressed, but not always.
Right. Not always. No.
And again, I just want to say that anything that you can imagine and that stays in your imagination, if it's a turn on to you, it's not harmful to you, to the fact that you're having that imagined sexual experience. It may be a turn on or a turn off to your partner. That has to do with them. That's not about you. And whatever sexual fantasy that you have, if you feel safe with your partner to talk about it, and maybe if it's okay with your partner to do some role play, can really enhance your sex life.
Exactly. And like I told my client, part of her sexual fantasies were actually what a normal sexual activity includes. And she thought that she can't talk about those activities, right?
Yeah.
Very, very basic acts. And then she, of course, comes from a culture where talking about sexuality is completely closed off.
So she had no idea okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So she had no idea what was normal, what was not, what was okay, what was not okay, or what was normal, what wasn't normal. Or basically, she was not that experienced in having a regular, normal sexual activity. So part of her imagination, she thought, it's not accurate. Anyway, I think we're going to come back to this topic, right? And there is so much to talk about sexual fantasies. And in this, Corona time, you can use sexual fantasies to also enhance your sexual quality. And I'd like to invite you to join us tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, where Dr. Jaffe and myself are going to be talking about codependency and addictions and relationships, and how this combination comes together, and what we can do about codependency and addiction so we can enhance the quality of our relationships.
And trauma.
And trauma.
Trauma. What is trauma, and how does trauma play a part in addiction and codependency, and how can we recover from it?
Exactly. So please call us, join us, 951-922-3532. And until tomorrow, don't forget, all you need is love.
All you need is love. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
$14.90 AM Smart Talk Radio, KMET, Banning, Beaumont, and Redlands. $14.90 AM Radio.
From ABC News, I'm Daria Albinger.